Poggio Bracciolini, the poor boy who became personal secretary to the Pope, personal secretary to the Pope, personal secretary to the Pope. Poggio Bracciolini, the poor boy who became personal secretary to the Pope in 15th century Rome, and later literally a book hunter, joining the poet Petrarch and other scholars known as humanists.
Copies it and sends it to his friends, and they begin to copy it, so it begins to spread again.
So that's how things get passed on.
Exactly.
The book spread, as did its ideas.
Sounds kind of like you support religion imposing its ideas on the rest of us. I'm very concerned that a branch of Christianity has gotten some of its tenets into our laws, like stem cell research, linking foreign aid to reproductive issues and so forth. If you were president, would you work hard to make Christian social issues the law of the land?
We said in our founding document, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Now, should we teach children that or not? Fine. How do you think we're randomly gathered protoplasm? We could have been rhinoceroses, but we got lucky this week.
But if your aim is to kill religion, as mine is, then just let me finish. If your aim is to kill religion, then since evolution is manifestly true, then if there are people out there who really believe that if you are an evolutionist, you've got to be an atheist, then all I've got to do is to persuade them of evolution, which should be comparatively easy, since the evidence is overwhelming, and I'll turn them all into atheists. I'm not one of those who wants to stop Christian traditions. This is historically a Christian country. I'm a cultural Christian. Same way as many of my friends call themselves cultural Jews or cultural Muslims. So yes, I love singing carols along with everybody else. 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 I'm not one of those who wants to purge our society of our Christian history.
I am born again. Did you just say that you're a Christian? I am pure, virtuous, wholesome, innocent individual that's out to help people. Lucifer is? Say that again. Lucifer is a pure, holy, virtuous.
I gave a lecture once at an Orlando conference where the whole point of my lecture was to deny as emphatically as I could and as categorically as I knew how the existence of God. And when I began that lecture, I said, what my task is today is to convince you folks that God does not exist. Came this gasp from the crowd. What are you talking about? What kind of game are you playing with? I'm not playing. I said, the worst thing that could ever happen to us is to discover that God exists. The worst thing that could ever happen to us is to discover that God exists. The worst thing that could ever happen to us is to discover that God exists.
He loves me, and know how he loves you and me. What a great chorus, why don't you sing it with me?
If you can explain this as a bag of tricks, then it's not real.
Know how he loves you and me.
I have one, and that is we should have a national curriculum on world religions that is compulsory for all school children, from grade school through high school, for the public schools, for the private schools, for the home schooling.
Also added that there were annual fast days appointed by the government. Those earliest Americans didn't know anything about a separation of faith from government. Life by that model.
Yeah, I do.
You live as if this world doesn't exist.
It's necessary.
So you live as if this world may not even exist.
Yeah.
Free will is an illusion.
I would say the self is an illusion. I can say, I can raise my hand, and I did it. That's just an illusion.
It's not science, it's a theory of knowledge. This is the philosophy. The philosophy dominated the 1930s and the 40s. The 1930s and the 40s. The 1930s and the 40s. The 1930s and the 40s.
In the aftermath of World War I, added to the widespread unrest and dissatisfaction.
The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria are Sunni Muslims in a country where the majority are rival Shiites. ISIS now occupies territory stretching from northern Syria to northern Iraq and took Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, last week. ISIS now threatens Samarra, believed to be the birthplace of its leader. Holly Williams has been covering the rise of ISIS for years now. She joins us this evening from the northern city of Erbil. Holly, what do we know about ISIS's leadership?
Well, Jeff, the group's mysterious leader is a man known as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He is so elusive that we only have a couple of grainy photographs of him. But al-Baghdadi now commands several thousand men in Iraq and Syria, where he's trying to set up a state based on Islamic law. Al-Baghdadi is so feared that some people have dubbed him the new Osama bin Laden, and the US government has placed a $10 million bounty on his head.
And we have seen ISIS sweep through northern Iraq pretty quickly here. How did they become this kind of force?
Well, ISIS has spent several years fighting in the Syrian civil war, doing battle not just against the Syrian regime, but also against other Syrian opposition groups that don't like the hardline form of Islam that ISIS is trying to impose. The group's men are committed and battle-hardened, and here in northern Iraq, their opponents have been Iraqi government soldiers who, despite billions of dollars in American equipment and training, simply laid down their weapons and ran away when the Islamic militants moved in.
Holly Williams in Erbil, thank you very much.
Explosive exchange.
Friday night's heated exchange. Actor Ben Affleck, TV host Bill Maher, and author Sam Harris had an explosive exchange.
Hot debate.
Should we be able to criticize Islam?
We have to be able to criticize bad ideas. Islam
but why
is the motherlode of bad ideas.
What Sam Harris said was outrageous.
And I do think it's racist.
It is gross and racist.
It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
It's like
we need to get beyond this shallow debate.
This is what Islam is. This is what Muslim people are.
There's ISIS, there's global jihadists.
The Muslims are this or the Muslims are that.
How about the more than 1 billion people who aren't fanatical?
The conversation will no doubt continue.
Will certainly continue for better and for worse.
You're not listening to what we are saying.
40% want adulterers stoned to death. Now, it's true only 16% want apostates stoned to death, but that's the best, more or less the best result you get on that question in the Muslim world, with the exception of a place like Albania. So when you look at any of these specific questions, and this is my argument, that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences.
Tyler, you're gonna be in a position where you're gonna go, for me, altruistic behavior, and the guy comes along and goes, but for me, right now, it's hurting you. And you say, but you can't hurt me. He says, why not? Because for me, it's altruistic behavior. He says, but for me, it's hurting you behavior. And then what I'm saying is,
there are people like that.
I know there is, but is that evil?
Again, relative to me, that is evil, but to him, that's fine.
If he hurts you,
I wouldn't like that. I'd stab him back.
Okay, but because he's offending you in some way, is he hurting you in some way? Do you have some value or dignity he's hurting? With your atheism,
nerves that flow through my body.
Yeah, I know it may be painful. I mean, it may be painful, but
I don't have a dignity that he's hurting.
Right. So you have no value.
Yeah. Yes.
You do or don't?
I do not have value. I'm irrelevant to the universe. I'm just a speck of dust.
Okay. So ultimately, your atheism, sorry, I didn't mean to say that, your atheism leaves you with no basis for good or evil, and it leaves you with no value and no dignity.
Yes.
And that's what's true.
Well, at that period of time, I had drifted away from a belief in a supreme being. And I never, as a result, passed along the feeling that we are all accountable in the end. He owns us. And that basic concept is very fundamental to all of us.
You feel that the absence, at least for a while, of a strong religious faith and belief
for some years
may have prevented you from instilling some of that in Jeff.
That's right.
Is that how you feel?
Yes, I think I had a big part to do with it. I mean, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway.
Now, what's interesting about many of the new atheists is they've tried to coat the bitter pill, what they think of the bitter pill of atheism, by claiming that you can be an atheist and still endorse the rightness, the correctness, the justification of our ethical beliefs. That if you hold that only science can provide the basis, the justification for what we believe, then you must come to the conclusion that our moral norms are without justification. Sam Harris has just written a new book in which he tries to pull the rabbit of ethics out of the hat of natural science. It can't be done. David Hume showed us why it can't be done in 1737. In the third volume of the Treatise of Human Nature, and what he showed then remains to be
This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. And that's the illusion of free will. And I want to talk about this because the illusoriness of free will is as certain a fact as the truth of evolution, in my mind. And unlike evolution, understanding this truth about the human mind has the potential to change our sense of moral goodness and what it would mean to create a just society. The question of free will touches nearly everything people care about. Religion, public policy, politics, the legal system, feelings of personal accomplishment, emotions like guilt and pride and remorse. So much of human life seems to depend on our viewing one another as conscious agents capable of free choice. So if the scientific community were ever to declare free will an illusion, as I think we eventually must, I think it would precipitate a culture war far more acrimonious than the one that has been waged on the subject of evolution. Now, I hope to do two things in this talk. I hope to convince you that free will is an illusion. And so I hope to take up the challenge that Dinesh laid down in the debate. And it's worse than an illusion. It's actually a totally incoherent idea. Which is to say it's impossible to describe a universe in which it could be true. Not only is it untrue, it's hard to make sense of what's even being claimed. And I also hope to convince you that understanding this truth about the human mind actually matters, and that it can change the way we view morality and questions of justice. Now, the popular conception of free will seems to rest on two assumptions. The first is that each of us was free to behave differently than we did in the past. You became a fireman, and yet you could have become a policeman. You chose chocolate, but you could have chosen vanilla. It certainly seems like this is the world we're living in. The second assumption is that we are the conscious source of our thoughts and actions. And so your experience of wanting to do something is in fact the constant cause of your doing something. You feel that you want to move, and then you move. So you are doing it. You, the conscious witness of your life. Now, unfortunately, we know that both of these assumptions are just untrue. The first problem is that we live in a world of cause and effect, and there's no way of thinking about cause and effect that allows us to say that the buck stops here. The buck never stops. Either our wills are determined by prior causes, a long chain of prior causes, and we're not responsible for it, or they're the product of chance, and we're not responsible for it, or there's some combination of chance and determination, but no combination seems to give you the free will of people. Cherish. My argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences.
Sam, let me begin with you. Let me just see if I can correctly summarize the premise of your book. you say that faith in God is inherently irrational, and it results in conflict and war, and in this day of weapons of mass destruction, religious faith should no longer be tolerated by reasonable people. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's a very good start, actually.
Okay, great. So if I accuse you of religious intolerance, you would take that as a compliment?
Yeah, I'm arguing for a certain kind of intolerance.
According to your book, The End of Faith, you say some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. Certain beliefs place their adherents beyond the reach of every peaceful means of persuasion. Now, does that mean you would try to eliminate the violence associated with faith by using violence against people of faith?
Well, first, let me concede, it sounds like an extreme statement taken out of context. What I was arguing...
I just want your context.
Yeah. The context is, I'm arguing that beliefs are really not as private as we imagine they are. Beliefs have inevitable consequences. Insofar as you really believe something, whenever your behavior is implied in that belief, it's going to be affected by the beliefs. But we are dealing with some subset of the Muslim world that believes in principles of jihad and martyrdom, which are really deal breakers when it comes time to organize a global civilization. When it comes time to organize a global civilization. There's no possible future in which aspiring martyrs are going to make good neighbors. And until Muslims themselves start to acknowledge that and start to marginalize this death cult that is growing in their midst, we have a tremendous problem.
Okay. Religious faith should no longer be tolerated. Some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. Religious faith should no longer be tolerated. To kill people for believing. It comes time to organize a global civilization. To kill people for believing them. It comes time to organize a global civilization. To kill people for believing. I'm arguing for a certain kind of intolerance. To kill people for believing. It comes time to organize a global civilization. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences.
Many of them had been mobilized in late 1943 and 1944.
suicide unit. The new unit is called the Shinbu Tokutai, or Divine Wing Special Attack Corps. Shinbu is a more formal way to pronounce the two characters that spell kamikaze. Pilots volunteer by the hundreds and begin to undergo rigorous training. Each day began with the singing of the Japanese national anthem. Then, trainees would recite the imperial oath first given by Emperor Meiji to the Army and Navy in 1882.
He would receive a lunch of polished white rice, which by this time, late in the war, was quite a delicacy in Japan. Yet he thought to himself, why am I eating this? What's the point? I'm going to be dead soon.
The pilot would say goodbye to his companions the night before and distribute among them his meager possessions and what money he had, carrying with him only a few charms.
The Japanese kamikaze pilots would probably carry several charms or talisman. Normally they'd have a headband pronouncing certain victory or sure to kill the Americans. They might have a flag inscribed with the names of other members of their units, wishing them success on their mission. And possibly some would have a 1,000-stitch belt. This was what amounted to a belly band, and each stitch was collected by a mother, a girlfriend, a wife on street corners of cities or towns. They asked individuals to add one stitch at a time, so that the 1,000 stitches would bring the wearer good luck and good fortune.
This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences. This is my argument that specific beliefs have consequences.
Some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. Religious faith should no longer be tolerated. To kill people for believing. It comes time to organize a global civilization. To kill people for believing them. It comes time to organize a global civilization. To kill people for believing. I'm arguing for a certain kind of intolerance. To kill people for believing. It comes time to organize a global civilization.
Majid Nawaz, author of Radical, My Journey Out of Islamist Extremism. As the title of his book suggests, he has unique insight into the world of religious extremism. Also, Krish Namanpour, Andrew Sullivan, Charles Blow from the New York Times are back as well. You were arrested, you were imprisoned in Egypt, and it's really when you were in custody in Egypt that you began to change. You began to change your mind.
This is a crucial point, and it comes back to this point of humanitarianism.
I was radicalized because of what I witnessed in Bosnia with the Srebrenica massacre, and my belief at the time that nobody was there to help and intervene on behalf of the Muslims in Bosnia. My exit from the radical group that I joined was when Amnesty International adopted me as a prisoner of conscience in Egypt, and on principle began campaigning for my release despite knowing that I believed them to be my enemy. So, and I've written in my book that where the heart leads, the mind can follow. And it was Amnesty's humanitarian intervention on a micro level for me that led to my journey. Now, I'm somebody who, whereas before I was fighting democracy, I'm now standing for Parliament in the UK for the 2015 general elections. If we can replicate that experience that happened to me on a micro level, on a macro level, say for example in Syria, then we can go some way to stemming the flow of fighters that are joining Jabhat al-Nusra.
And you go out and you talk to people who held the same ideas that you held and try to convince them, try to kind of hold it up to logic.
Yeah, I mean, when I left the group, I basically decided to challenge the former ideology, to challenge what I now call the Islamist ideology. And I go to countries like Pakistan, I go speak to the students on the ground. I visited the city where Malala Yousafzai was shot, for example, and we organized a big debate there, and challenging the Taliban and discussing the causes of extremism. I'm attempting to generate alternative discourse around this whole agenda.
May I ask you, what has happened to your faith in that period?
It's very possible, and in fact the majority of Muslims in this world are Muslims and have no track whatsoever, not just with terrorism, but with the politicized version of Islam that I refer to as Islamism. And that's briefly defined as the desire to impose any given interpretation of the religion over society.
Right.
Most Muslims in the world, the vast majority of them, are of the faith variety rather than the ideological
But in most
variety.
Muslim societies, the notion of a separation between religion and politics is really not understood or even accepted, let alone embraced, right?
I wouldn't put it that simply. I think that's of sort of modern times. That's the way in which it's been going, because the most dominant voice, those who are shouting the loudest, are those who adopt this ideology of Islamism. If you look at the history, just very briefly, look at the history. Actually, Islam has been unique in that sense that it's never had a clergy. It's only with modern Islamism, the Iranian Revolution, for example, was unique that it reintroduced the idea of a politicized clergy that were ruling in God's name. Whereas before Khomeini, the Shiite Muslims, or 20% of the world's Muslims, believed that no man had the right to rule in God's name until the Messiah returned. As for the 80% who are Sunnis, they've never had a clergy for their entire history. And so modern day Islamism is attempting to bring about the very thing it despises, which is Western Catholicism before the Reformation. So modern day Islamism is attempting to bring about the very thing it despises, which is Western Catholicism before the Reformation. Modern day Islamism is attempting to bring about the very thing it despises, which is Western Catholicism before the Reformation. Modern day Islamism is attempting to bring about the very thing it despises, which is Western Catholicism before the Reformation.